episode 100 of The Ways and do that on the topic of power building. Hey guys, Adam here. Welcome back to my channel. I realize it's been quite a while since I put out an episode of The Ways. I think the last one was actually episode 99, which was the overhead squat video. If you haven't seen that yet, I suggest you check it out. There's a pretty good information in there. So I thought, what a great way to come back to making YouTube content would be to do episode 100 of The Ways and do that on the topic of power building, which has caused quite a brouhaha recently on the social medias. So if you're new to this channel, I hope that you will subscribe to it, and also check me out on Instagram, where I post a lot of my day-to-day training, nutrition, meals, and whatnot. And what The Ways is an episodic chronicle of my training, my thoughts on training, my thoughts on and tips on specific exercises, food, and that kind of stuff. So hopefully you'll check that out. Okay, so what is this thing called power building? It has popped up quite a bit recently. Some guys are trying to claim it. Some are trying to define it. Some are on the fence on whether or not it is a good system to use. And some just downright hate it and are trying their best to destroy it. What is that? What is that? I am not one of those guys. And I think the reason why I'm doing this video, although I'm a bit late to the game, is that since I am one of the only, if not the only, power builder in the community, I should make a video on my thoughts on it. Okay, so where are we right now with the topic of power building? And I was quite surprised actually that when I was going through the topic lists on YouTube, just how much stuff there was on power building. And I'll admit right now that I haven't watched a lot of the videos, and the guys that I have watched, I haven't watched all of the video, so I apologize for that. Because to me, I think it's a silly topic, and it doesn't have to be defined. I don't understand why everything has to be defined in terms of today's lifting definitions and then packed neatly into its own little box. I mean, you can do whatever the hell you want, and if it gets you results, great, keep doing that. But certainly, the guys who have claimed power building of their own, like Jeff Nippard and Omar, and even Steve Shaw from Massive Iron, to me are not power builders. And the guys who have been trying their best to define it, discuss it, and there's nothing wrong with discussing things, but you should have some kind of background in your topic if you're going to discuss it. So guys like Basement Bodybuilding, Bald Omni-Man, even Jeff Schofield, and of course, I think the two biggest haters would be natural hypertrophy.
So power building is something that I've mentioned many times on this channel, and you might know that I am not an advocate of this method at all.
Are you retarded?
And Faz from Faz Lifts. Again, none of these guys, in my opinion, are power builders. They all have great physiques, of course, in their own right, but they do not have any sort of experience in power building. And when I think of power building, you have to sort of flip that term over, and it's the building of power. And I mean, what is power? I mean, the simple definition of power is force times velocity. So you have a certain amount of force that you have to apply under a certain velocity to generate power. So The guys who are trying to define it at the moment are thinking of it in oversimplified terms, in my opinion. Well, they're just saying that it is simply a blending of powerlifting and bodybuilding. But I think you have to have a propensity for building power and a background in bodybuilding. And certainly before I started specific training for the Highland Games, and certainly that's when I had my introduction to explosive training, building explosive power. I already had 15 or 16 years as a bodybuilder where I focused mostly on being powerful. I always wanted to be, the most powerful guy in the gym, the biggest, the thickest guy, and my training certainly focused on that. So I've always done barbell movements, barbell squat, bench, and deadlift. And these are the three lifts that the guys who are defining it, or doing their best to define it, are saying is blended with bodybuilding.
That is strength, boy. That is power.
Now, I don't think it's just powerlifting. If it was, if you were to look at the most successful power builder of all time, I would think it would have to be Ronnie Coleman. He was a power lifter, turned bodybuilder, became Mr. Olympia, and had a chokehold on the Mr. Olympia for many years. So if you looked at it in that simplified terms, I would argue that Ronnie Coleman would be the best power builder of all time. But to me, it is, again, more than that. You have to do power movements, and that's where I think the guys just lack experience in. Many of my lifts have the word power right in it. Power snatch, power jerk, power shrugs. And all of my lifts are centered around building explosive power. And my background in bodybuilding, I am able to turn that into successful muscle building or hypertrophy. Now, there's arguments that if someone were to say a noob lifter, your general YouTube fitness enjoyer,
You two look like you need to get wet.
these are the guys who are just starting out, that if they jumped into this program, that they would have some success for a short amount of time, and then it would no longer be good for hypertrophy. I disagree with this, but again, the guys who are selling these power building programs are not power builders, right? None of their training, when I look at it, says power builder to me. And I have done this style of training for the last 20 years, and never in those 2 decades have I ever called myself a power builder. I've just called myself an athlete. And that brings me up to the topic with me and Faz. The first time I ever saw this being discussed as an actual term was Faz put up a meme where basically it was just a made-up term for fat guys with terrible form to define themselves. And I said to Faz, I said, so would you call me a fat slob with terrible form? And he said, well, no, but I also don't think of you as a power builder, and I'm surprised that you would even label yourself as a power builder. And I said, no, but I have always focused on building power. Even when I was a bodybuilder, I was a bodybuilder who loved being powerful. And he said, oh, okay, well that sort of makes sense when you look at it in that terms. If we were to look at other guys who I would consider power builders, it would be athletes, really, because that's what they were, would be golden era bodybuilders. Franco Columbu, Lou Ferrigno, any of those guys who were focused on raw power, and they did things like power cleans. Many of them were athletes. They competed in World's Strongest Man competitions. They were on, Battle of the Stars and all this stuff. And they were always doing things like push presses, behind the neck jerks, power cleans, all of these explosive power movements at the same time that they were bodybuilders. So that to me would be your definition of a power builder, which brings me into guys like professional strongmen. Classic strongmen like John Paul Sigmarsson, Gary Taylor from Wales. I always wanted to, even back in the early 90s, when I was watching World's Strongest Man competitions, I identified with Gary Taylor. I wanted to be Gary Taylor. Just his traps, massive shoulders. That's what I wanted to look like. And even, Bill Kazmaier. When I was a teenager, I remember Bill Kazmaier saying that if you move things slow, you will always be slow. So I always said, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So every time I did bench press or the concentric on a squat or the pull on a deadlift or anything like that, I wanted to be as fast as possible. John Paul Sigmarsson, excellent. And a lot of these guys too were also Highland Games competitors. They competed at Highland Games World Championships. But again, they were all competitive bodybuilders. Gary Taylor, John Paul Sigmarsson, all competed in bodybuilding, all did strongmen, all trained for power. And of course, you couldn't exclude Mariusz Pudzianowski, who was one of the greatest world's strongest men of all time. And if you looked at his training, his training is very much like my training. It's a lot of power movements, behind the neck jerks, heavy squats, front squats, jump squats, all that stuff, coupled with bodybuilding movements. And I think that's probably one big reason why I've stayed injury-free all these years, is because that classic bodybuilding gave me the know-how, the proper technique to stay injury-free, so that when I got into this training for Highland Games, I was all set. And that's another reason why I don't think you can simply say that power building is a blending of powerlifting and bodybuilding, because a lot of powerlifters are not bodybuilders. And powerlifting, I said before, in my opinion, has killed things like the bench press, like the back squat, and like the deadlift, because it's turned into simply about moving as much weight as possible, and a lot of times with the shittiest form that you can get away with. And I did one powerlifting competition back in the early 90s, and even back then, a lot of the guys still had great form. They were high bar back squatters. So it's really only maybe within the last decade that I really noticed that things have sort of descended into madness, if you will. Now, one guy that brought up an interesting point on power building is Kevin Reel, or Hypertrophy with Kev on Instagram. Great page. If you're interested, I suggest you give him a follow. Now, he brought up the point of specificity in your training towards power building. And I have done that certainly for the last 20 years as a Highland Games competitor. My training has been geared specifically towards throwing things a certain distance. That being said, even when I retire from competition, I will still do this style of training for the rest of my life. It has been the best thing that I have done, far better than just traditional bodybuilding, and I will continue to do squat, bench, deadlift, but on top of that, I will still continue to do Olympic lifting and their variations. So that is my take on power building. You have to be powerful in order to be a power builder, and I have gotten great gains from that over the years. I'm certainly bigger, stronger, thicker, more dense than I ever was as just a traditional bodybuilder, even training for power. So I think it's certainly like anything in lifting, it's individual, and if you are up for it, up for the learning curve, and that is sort of one big argument against things like incorporating the Olympic lifts and explosive movements, is the time it takes to learn them. But if you learn them, I mean, the benefits are endless, and I'm certainly proof of that. You don't need any scientific study to see that. You can just look at me. And I think if I was to sort of look at another guy without defining it, because I don't think he used a definition, I think it's stupid. But if I was to think of another power builder, I might include Alec and Curie in there, because he does a lot of the same lifts that I have done. And I mean, I have moved some huge weights over the years. Again, Sam Sheethar is another one, I think. Although he doesn't have a bodybuilding background, but I believe I did see him do a 365 push press one day on Instagram. So anyway, I don't want to talk too much about that. I'm already into, it looks like about 15 minutes, which is plenty on this topic. So with that, stay tuned for the next episode of The Ways, which will be 101. Please subscribe to this channel. Follow me on Instagram, and good hunting.